If you want to know how to build and install this beautiful cabinet, stick around because I'm going to show you. But first, what I want to show you is what the cabinet looks like when it's completed. I want to talk about some of the parameters that I deal with when I measure for a job, like the soffit up here, the width of the room, the height of the room. Are there any lights up above on the soffit that we need to deal with? We went ahead and covered these up with drywall and texture. But this is all something that's really important. We definitely don't want to be making the cabinet the same width as the room. So how much do we take off? These are all very important questions. This cabinet is 12 and a half feet wide by 9 feet tall. So it's a very large cabinet. It's also not installed with a normal applied scribe molding. I wanted this particular face frame to be scribed to the wall so that we didn't have to have any additional molding applied to it. I think it's a much better look, being that there aren't any doors or anything. So when we put this cabinet in, there's a lot of things to be thinking about, and I just kind of wanted to start this video off with discussing some of them. I get a lot of questions about how I attack the jobs. What do I do when I first go see the job? So I wanted to kind of discuss that a little bit at the start, but let's get cranking. So the first thing is, got to machine all the parts. Okay, since I already had all my parts ripped to width, all I have to do is cross-cut all the parts. I have my extension set on the workbench. As you can see that on the outside of my assembly table. That is screwed to the assembly table so that I have support when cutting those 10-foot long boards. Makes it so much simpler. And now, as you can see, I can push this through without any problems whatsoever. Without that extension, it's actually very difficult to cut long boards like this. And I just flip them around end for end and cut them to length. When I'm done, I stand them up. Move on to cutting the backs. I need to cut these guys about 30 inches wide, and they're going to be just about 8 foot long. So I go ahead and rip these guys, and of course these are 1/2 inch thick, not 3/4 inch like typical. 1/2 inch thick. After I cut that to width, it's important to cut these to length. You could use a track saw or what I just did. Cut one end off and check this for square after you've cut it to length. This is a good method if you have a straight piece to start with. After that's all done, next step is to take out the saw blade and put in a stacked dado set for all the joinery. The joinery is going to be typically 3/4 inch wide by 1/4 inch deep, and it's going to be dados, rabbets, and grooves. I have a piece of wood stuck on the end of my board and it's not sitting flat up against my rip fence. It's important that you check these boards as they get stuff embedded in them when you stand them up on edge. So check that, make sure it's very clean. Check all your boards, just assume that there's something on it. Put pressure down as you push this piece forward. Remember, these are long pieces, so you need to put consistent pressure down, but also need to put consistent pressure out as you're pushing it through the blade. Top and bottom are both the same. Now, keep pressure towards the fence as you are pushing this through. This dado is going in the middle of this almost 9 foot long board. Keep consistent pressure and push it slowly, and you will have good results. You should have pressure on the left side as well as the right side in an equal fashion so that you don't pivot the workpiece. It just needs to slide smoothly, complete the cut. Now the next item is to do the rabbets. The rabbets are when you're putting the saw blade all the way up to the fence and cutting on the outside of a workpiece. In order to do that, I need to put in my sacrificial fence. If you don't have a fancy sacrificial fence, you can get some clamps that will go on to Biesmeyer fences and lock in. I know Rockler sells them. There are some other places that sell them as well. I do like my sacrificial fence made just for the Biesmeyer fences. So after you clamp this down, just set this up so that you have essentially a flush cut, but you need to make sure that it's the right depth so you can use a scrap piece that you've been working off of and take your scrap piece, put it right on top of the blade, and just take your fingernail and you can tell whether or not it's flush to the outside. Make a couple test passes and you're good to go. So I'm just going to make a couple of test passes and check it on the workpiece to see if I have the right width, and we're good to go. Again, when you're doing this on long pieces, it's really good idea. I really like my grippy gloves because when you have grip on your piece like this, it makes it so much easier. It's a lot less work to keep hold of the workpiece. And then we're good. We're going to set up for the back panel now. That's going to be a taller rabbet, but it's also going to be narrower at 1/2 inch. We're going to do all the bottoms, tops, sides, but not the center dividers. If you have a lot of rabbets to do or any type of joinery with long boards, it's a good idea to put in a hold down. And this is a custom hold down that I've made for my router, my shaper, my table saw. And this has a open in the middle area. So that space allows me to do a couple of things. I can see the blade. I know if the workpiece is running up right up against the fence, but also I can measure. So it's a nice space to have that open. As you can see, when you're running almost 9-foot long boards, having this hold down is extremely valuable. I don't have to worry about putting too much pressure down. More so, I just have to push the piece. And again, my grippy gloves help. You can imagine doing this without the grippy gloves. It's very difficult. So just run it smoothly and consistently, and you'll be good to go. This hold down is amazing, and it's free. You can see how it just glides through, and I get very consistent results without any bumps in the rabbet. To mark these and to lay this out, what I use is my jig here. So this is just a bunch of information for my line boring machine. The series of holes that it makes, this is a 13-hole machine, and it's 15 1/8, give or take, a 32nd or so. So what I do is from this mark up here, 10 inches, I just take this and I have my first hole, I have a line, I can take that, put it on my 10-inch mark, and then I take it to the last hole and I put a mark. My other line, which is the spring indicator, I can put that on the line where I just put that mark, put the spring mark there, and then continue. And this really helps speed up the process. It's much better than trying to figure out, take this area and divide it. This is much better, and it gives me a visual. I can go from the bottom here, put a line, or I just put one line and then take this and come across with a couple of tick marks. First thing I do with my line boring machine when I use it is put magnetic lights on it. It really helps me to see, and they're great. You can just adjust them to whatever spot you need. Makes seeing the line way easier. Make sure to clamp down a support piece. These are long boards and they need all the support they can get. I have a spacer block, and that is for the front pins, not the back pins, and it is the same thickness of your back. Now you can see with my support piece, I can let it rest and it doesn't tip or anything. It's very stable. Just line up my line and slowly check to make sure that we're good to go. Get my dust collection hose ready to go, and we are about ready to fire this up. Start plunging down and make the cuts. This line boring machine is tremendous. Now I do understand that not everybody is going to have one of these machines, but if you do a lot of this work, you really should have one. It drills a much better hole. There's no tear out, especially when you're talking about plywood. The handheld drills are nice and they're very convenient, but they're prone to chipping out the plywood. This is a much more professional result, and the results speak for themselves. You can see I'm plunging down right on that line. Those lights really help me see. It's very difficult as the lights from the ceiling are above the machine, so it casts a lot of shadows. All right, now we're on to assembly, finally. It seems like jobs sometimes take a little while before you get to assembly stages, but once you start getting to the assembly stages, it's great. I'm using my homemade squares to help assemble the cabinets, and 18 gauge 1 1/4 brad nails. Spin it around. And of course, when you're working with long pieces, it's nice to have a big cabinet to work on. So this assembly table is phenomenal. Now, when you do something like this where you mess up and you miscalculate the back, I have to raise this cabinet up in order to rip a little bit off the back because I made it a little too big. So if you're like me and you screw up, just raise the cabinet up. That way I don't have to worry about ripping this piece and taking off the cabinet. So now I can just rip it and go right underneath this cabinet and fix my mistake. I like to put glue on my back, Rabbets. It adds a lot of strength to the cabinet. But one problem is that when you put glue down, it beads up like this. So really, when you put the back on, what's going to happen is it's all going to spill out and you're going to get glue squeeze out on the inside of the cabinet. So to combat this, I take the bead and I actually just use my finger and run this thing down so you basically get rid of that bead. Do it in the middle divider as well. And if you do this method, you will not get glue squeeze out. And if you do, you're probably putting way too much glue in that rabbet. So to assemble this, all you do is you just put it in the back corner, set it down, and drop it down the rest of the way, being careful not to damage the workpiece as you're doing it. Check the cabinet for square and then bump it if necessary to even the numbers out. Make sure the piece is nice and straight all the way down. Nail it off. It's nice to have nails going on the middle divider, so get a line and mark a line where you know those nails need to be and just fire them away. Looking down inside the cabinet, it's very clean, no glue squeeze out. The method works really well. Nice and tight and very clean. 2 side cabinets. These are going to be the side vertical cabinets that are almost 9 feet long. They're going to be about 30 inches wide by 9 feet. It takes me 15 minutes to assemble one of these cabinets. This speed is 20 times actual. I think that's actually pretty fast, 15 minutes, considering I'm taking time to look at my phone. Got to make sure I have the right playlist going on my headphones. Making sure the cabinet's square, nail on the back. Very nice, very clean. And the whole process goes without a hitch. Making sure that I'm making the cabinet the same width all the way down. It's time to flip this guy over. Being that it's pretty good sized, it's difficult to work with. The key with building any cabinets is you got to have a place to build them and you got to have a place to store them. So in order to store this, the first thing I think about is getting it off the workbench and onto the floor, where I can then move it to one of my platforms. I carefully put this thing down on the floor, and it takes me a couple of tries to stand up. You remember watching one of my videos about shop space and having a shop with high ceilings? Well, having a shop with little or no beams in the ceiling would also be ideal. Beams can really get in the way of cabinet making. Okay, the last cabinet is done. Now just slide this guy off, and this cabinet is much simpler. You learn from the first cabinet and you realize that you need to push real hard right here in order to get that bottom to go under. And then it's very easy to slide this one on. Again, take a look at these platforms. I'm getting a lot of feedback on these. I'm going to go ahead and make a special video just on those, but you can see the advantage. All right, we are on to face frames. Now, this material is 3/4 inch poplar. I rip, join, and rip and joint and rip and joint until everything is all done. You know my method for ripping face frame material. Check out the videos if you don't know how to do it so the pieces don't warp. Take a little bit off of each side. That's the best way to do it, and your boards will be nice and straight. These are long boards. It's nice to have a big jointer, and for me, not jointing them is not an answer, so I don't ever want to have cabinets put together with the non-jointed boards. I prefer a nice clean edge. Onto the miter saw to cut them to length, and you'll notice my nice stops that are a recent acquisition. These are adjustable and they are sweet. If you have any questions about those, I'm going to be doing a video on those as well, a review. Absolutely phenomenal. Go ahead and make all these cuts. One thing to note as well, after I make these cuts for the middle parts, I joint them as well so that both sides are clean for the middle dividers, if there are any. This cabinet is going to have a beaded face frame, so I am going to notch the beads with my router using this setup. There's lots of different ways to do a beaded face frame. A long time ago, I decided to pick this machine up because I was doing so many beaded face frames that it made a lot of sense to have this. I say machine, it's not a machine, it's a tool. And this is an absolutely necessary tool if you do a lot of beaded face frames. This particular notching bit is 1.5 inches or so for a 1/4 inch bead. And to set it up, it needs to be exactly a 1/4 inch high. So I'm going to use my gauge at 1/4 inch height. Set that up. Once that's all set up, I can then start running the pieces. To start this, you're going to want to get a sacrificial board, and you're going to want to test cut the 45-degree miters on the ends. You want to make sure that this board is the same width, top and bottom. This is very important as your joints will not work out if they're not even, top and bottom. This is a top view. You can see my pencil lines represent the cutting outside edge, and I run the pieces through the router, and this plunging mechanism helps achieve this. So all I do is clamp the workpiece and run it over the spinning router bit. It's a very easy process, but you need to make sure that the piece is nice and tight to the workbench, nice and tight everywhere, because if there's a little bit of a warp in the board, it's not going to be good. So you really need to have straight pieces in order to make this successful. You can see I have an extension on my fence as well. This is the test piece in and ready to go. I've got my stop set up. After you get the stop set up, you can make sure that these pieces are going to be in the right spot. Definitely use your sacrificial board if need be. And you can see my line clearly meeting up with the line on my router table. So make a couple of passes and this will be done. Of course, you have to make several passes when you have wide top and bottom or mid rails. This router bit will only cut 1.5 inches. So you can see it in action. It's pretty sweet. And that clamp really does a great job of holding it nice and tight. Make sure that you have a nice clean cut edge as you do this. You want to also make sure that you have dust collection going. Open up your fence to draw the air. You want to make sure that you collect all the wood chips because this is a messy job if you care about that kind of stuff. Now again, your sacrificial board is going to be your friend. This is my setup piece. I can do this as many times as I need to in order to make sure that all my settings are correct. And I can change the stop and dial it in at any time to make it perfect. It may seem simple, but actually getting these correct is really important. It affects so many things. So you want to make sure that your dimensions are perfect so that your rails are flush to the top, your dividers are totally correct from left to right. That's why this job takes a little extra time when you do a beaded face frame. This extension block that I made is great for long pieces. This particular cabinet, over 7 foot long, has a divider right in the middle, so you need to make extension blocks typically. As you can see, I can slide it all the way down. Again, this is such a nice thing of having this particular workbench like this. Now, to do the ends, you want to carefully cut those at 45-degree angles. You want to make sure that you don't cut too much or too little. It needs to be just right. That sounds familiar. Once it's just right, you can make all your cuts. After you're done with all your notches, now you need to bead it. So I put a mark so I know which edge to bead. And then make sure that you have the board nice and tight all the way to the workbench as you're running these. It's also a really good idea to make sure that the height is correct. You don't want to have a line where your notches are. It needs to be a nice, smooth transition. You also want to make sure that you're doing a light pass to begin so that you don't get tear out on your bead. This is really important, and I think it's often overlooked, as when you make a full bead, a lot of times you'll get tear out right on the little lip. So run them all through after you've done a scoring pass, and you'll get very good results. Making use of my full workbench. And now we are ready to assemble. Again, always feels so happy to get to this point because I know the end is just in sight. With all that done, I am now ready to start sanding. Now you want to make sure that these joints are very, very clean. You want to make sure that everything, all the defects are noted on your workpieces if you have any. This is a defect from the factory planing. And I go around and just circle all the defects and note them. I also want to make sure that the bead is below the surface so that I can sand this out and not worry about hitting the bead. So when you route the bead, make sure that it's below the surface nicely. Even though the joints are nice and smooth, you want to make sure that you sand them up so that they are perfect. And then make sure that the bead blends nicely with the other beads right at the 45-degree angle. If there's any more defects, even if there's molding going to cover it, it's nice to just get rid of them when you sand. So this piece is going to have a molding at the top, so I'm not too concerned about that, but I'll definitely sand it. But you can see the miters come together really nice. But I'll take a chisel to clean it out and some sandpaper. I am ready to sand. Of course, sanding is one of those jobs that nobody likes to do, but it's very rewarding when you sand your projects to get it to a nice smooth finish. It makes the finished product so much better. So take your time. Now I raise it up on my workbench using my the 2-inch risers that I have. I can raise it up, put all my clamps on it, let it dry, and work on the other cabinets while this is drying. This is a trick I showed in my tips video of putting on hanger strips in order to support this piece as you install it. I'll show you when I get to the installation why I do that. I also want to show you this particular part of the face frame, because I'm going to be scribing it, has to be removable. So there's no glue on that part of the face frame on the right and the left cabinet. I am going to remove this using this little space down here. I can access the screws that are holding it together. That's all sanded and everything's good to go, but I need to be able to access those screws, so I held them down about there so my screw gun can get in there and remove them. The top and bottom will both be removed. After I scribe it to fit perfectly, I will put them back in at the job site, and you will see that. Of course, I will put glue when I assemble at the job site. There's no glue now. As you can see, the best way to attach this when you get to the job site is to put glue on, and typically you might need nails to hold it. But I like this because it's a spring joint. All I have to do is add some quick setting glue in addition to yellow glue and put a little pressure right in the middle, and it holds nice and tight all the way up and down. Very nice. As you can see, all you need to do is push in the middle and it holds it. This gets a V-groove flush trim bit, and here I am doing that. That's a nice touch, especially on big cabinets that don't otherwise have any detail. Now you see those vertical lines? Those lines are extremely annoying, and that's from flush trimming. If you don't sand this workpiece, you will have lines in your finished paint job. So sand this completely until those vertical lines disappear. You don't want to see any of those lines. And then I'd take my homemade sanding block with a nice crisp corner. I can slide in the V-groove and make it really clean. All right, finally we can get this job installed. This particular job is going to be on carpet, so we are going to remove the carpet in order to make a stable platform, and we need to remove the baseboard as well as the carpet. So the one side was done. I might as well use this as a template for my second part. I'm just going to cut it with the razor blade and remove it. The next step is going to be taking out the baseboards and or the tack strips. So if you remove the tack strips, it'll give you more clearance. You may not have to remove the tack strips, but in my case, it makes a lot of sense to. Sometimes you can notch around them if there's a whole bunch of them, or you can just notch out the tack strips where you actually are putting the cabinet. There's no need to take out a ton of tack strips if you're going to be putting in cabinets that don't have anything touching the tack strips. Getting these in is no easy task, but I have a helper, so it makes it a lot easier. Of course, being that these cabinets are side by side but about 7.5 foot apart, I need to make sure that the soffit is the same distance to the cabinet on each side. So this is what I'm measuring right now. It's very important that these are as equal as possible. I can change the bottom of the baseboard to accommodate, but it's harder for me to change the crown molding. So this is the best solution, and make that laser line exactly where you need it in order to have everything be equal. So now that that's done, I can go ahead and start working on putting in the middle cabinet. Now, my helper has a tendency to want to play around when he's not working, so don't mind him. He's just bored. Hanger strips installed. Look at how easy that is to install. Absolutely amazing. It's hanging squarely. I have marks on my cabinet so I know how far back to go, and it hangs perfectly square. It's awesome. Now it's time to start thinking about scribing the right and left face frame member. You want to make sure that you put a line 3/4 inch in from whatever it is that you're going to be referencing off. In this case, it's that little piece up there. 3/4 inch in, I make a line on the top and bottom rail. I put the workpiece so it touches the line, and I use a clamp to hold it. Now, it's definitely important that you make sure the height is right, especially with a beaded face frame the way this is. This needs to be exactly perfect. And you want to make sure that that reference line is exactly in the right spot so that when you deduct the 3/4 inch or whatever that distance is, it's exactly perfect. If you deduct 3/4 of an inch but your line was only a 1/2 inch, you're going to have trouble getting everything to fit right, obviously. I set my caliper up and I make sure that that mark is in fact exactly what I want it to be, and that's 3/4 of an inch. Double check that, and now that's good. I can take it and run it all the way down. And notice I cut the handle off there. That's the little screw that comes out, and it gets in the way of the wall if it's full length. So I just get rid of it. Now, very carefully, without compressing the scribes as you go down, you want to run this down, and then you want to run it up from the baseboard all the way to the top. Now, even though that baseboard's going to be cut out, ultimately, it's there now, so I went ahead and scribed it. But as you can see, I'm running this up, and I keep a nice even feel to the scribes, making sure not to collapse that space. If you push too hard, you'll collapse the space in there, and your scribe will end up being the wrong size. So make sure that you do it nicely. And with textured walls, it's hard sometimes because it wants to start bumping. Now, as we get back to the shop, in order to actually remove this material, I've got to connect it to my workbench. If I was at the job site, I could do it there as well, but since I had to come back to the shop to cut a rabbet in the back in order to make this a little easier, I'm going to go ahead and do it at the shop. So I've got this part here. You can see there, I want to remove all the way to the line, but I don't want to go past the line. I want to leave the line, and I want to make sure that I get rid of the baseboard area too. Since the baseboard's not going to be there, I don't need to worry about that. And certainly you could cut it. As you start sanding this, just make sure that you take it slowly, make sure it's angled, and go at it nice and even until you get to the line. Okay, that was quick. Actually, it wasn't too quick, but I am done with this piece. Now I can switch out for the other piece. Now the other piece is a little bit wider as far as the amount of material I'm taking off, so I'm actually going to start it with my jigsaw. And I would rely more on the jigsaw to remove the bulk. Now, as you can see with this workbench setup, it's very nice. And it's actually very similar to what I would have in the job site if I had my full setup there. But it makes it nice to come here since the job is only 2 miles away from my home. Now with the jigsaw, I'm going to go ahead and put it on dust collection. Since I have it, it's going to make it so much better. It also is going to help the line be more visible as the dust will build up in this area if I don't use dust collection. Even though this has a blower, I find it still builds up and makes it harder to see the line. Now, just like with the sander, I want to make sure I tilt the jigsaw so that it's at an angle, and I'm essentially creating a point on the top surface, and that point is going to be referencing off of the wall, and it's going to be nice and tight. Now, of course, when you clamp it down, your clamps possibly are going to get in the way of the jigsaw base, and that is definitely happening here. So instead of moving the clamp, I decided to try to lift the sander a little bit. That didn't work, clearly. Just remove this clamp and give it a little more space. That's all you got to do, Dave. Sometimes it takes a little while for me to succumb to it and just suck it up and do it. And did I move it enough? Not sure, but it sure looks like I'm a little tight. Sawing done, I am now ready to fine tune it with the belt sander again. Just to finish this up, I want to leave the line and clean it up. Of course, the dust collection with the belt sander is almost 100%. And it's just really, really nice to use this tool for fine-tuning your scribes. So whether or not I'm working on my countertops or this type of thing, baseboard, you name it, the belt sander for scribing for me is super awesome. I even scribe moldings with my belt sander, as you've seen probably in some of my videos. Here I am just coming up to the end, and where that baseboard is, I can just take a little more off. Alright, this is the piece after it's done being scribed. As you can see, there's a little line left over from the jigsaw, and this is from tilting it. So if you find yourself with a little bit of a line, that's nice to just go ahead and remove it before you put finish on, because just in case there's actually a little bit of a scratch in the wood, you're not going to see that. So you want to sand this before you take this anywhere else and make sure that that's completely removed. And it's hard to see, but that line is there. Trust me, it's there. So remove it with your random orbital and you're done. It's definitely a good idea to just go ahead and sand after you scribed. Okay, we are ready to see how these fit, and besides the fact that I struggled to get it in at the bottom next to the baseboard, I finally did, and see how the top fits. Nice and tight. Perfect. Let me go ahead and take that off, check the other side, and it fits nicely as well. Now before I go ahead and do this, I'm going to go ahead and assemble, or I should say, I'm going to go ahead and attach the 3 cabinets together. Up until now, it's just been floating. Now the space was really, really, really tight, so it's not like when I secure these, the cabinet is going to shrink. But if there was a big gap there, obviously that wouldn't be good. It was tight to begin with. So now you can see very tight, and right to my layout lines. That's my setback line, so that's 4 inches. Of course, you can see the bottom nice and tight, and we've got screws holding this thing with each other. And I went ahead and put 2 screws on the very bottom of the upper cabinet and a couple screws behind the face frame as it goes up. Can't see it. So let's go ahead and put some glue on this guy. And the GlueBot container is really nice in these applications because you have so much vertical surface. It's nice to have a bottle that will actually dispense glue holding it vertically. With that all glued up everywhere, I'm going to go ahead and get this nice and tight, and I'm going to use a face frame clamp to hold this flush, get it right back to where it was when I sanded it initially, and use my drill driver to secure the pocket screw. I have actually access at the top, so I'm going to secure that with a face frame clamp as well. The bottom I'm going to do the exact same way. The only thing is that I can only put a face frame clamp on the bottom because I have that open space. So if you design cabinets like this, you want to make sure you leave yourself plenty of room. It is a pain to get the drill driver in there, but it's a necessary evil because it holds it nice and tight. So once you get the screw in there, you can remove the face frame clamp after the glue has set, or you can remove it beforehand. The screw is going to hold it, but since I have the clamp there, I might as well let it just sit there for a little while longer while I get this set up. Move on to the other side. Let me show you what this looks like. So my goal is to have a nice tight fit, but also a flush fit so that my sanding is not so much when I go to sand the face frame. Now this is where I told you I was going to put some quick set glue in combination with the yellow glue. All I need to do is press in the middle and it compresses top and bottom. And once the quick set glue is dry, within only 10 seconds or so, I can release it. And the yellow glue will hold it permanently. So as you can see, I've got plenty of glue going on the cabinet as well as the face frame. And make sure you've got plenty of glue. You want glue squeeze out on these joints. You do not want to leave these things starving for glue. Tap, tap with a little mallet action. That's a nice compressed fit. That was what I was going for. And now you can see me more than anything as I do this. But I'm putting these face frame clamps to get it nice and tight, flush, and I can use my drill driver to secure it. And of course, the same thing is repeated on the bottom, and we'll let it dry after I secure these guys with screws. We got to let this stuff dry before I attempt to sand. So I actually came back the next day to finish up the moldings, which I will be cutting at the shop just as soon as we are done here. Put some more quick set glue. While the yellow glue dries, this will hold it nice and tight. So the advantage of this is that I don't have to put nails in the front in order to hold this thing on. It goes with the theme, right? No nails on any of this stuff. So we might as well continue it. I will have some nails for the molding, but I'm not going to lose sleep over that. That's okay. I sprayed a little accelerator, and that is about a 5-second cure time at that point, and you can let it go and it will be held. After this is done, we can move on to checking out all the parts, make sure everything's clean, and let me show you the finished product. You can see that nice glue squeeze out, and that's imperative to make a nice joint. Also, you want to make sure that you don't have glue dripping down the bead or anywhere. So if you do have glue dripping down inside that bead area, you want to make sure you clean it out, as it's really difficult to get to. Now, as we look at the face frame, how tight it is up against the wall, it really aids in compressing the joint. So you almost didn't even need pocket screws in this case. I could have made it even tighter if I wanted to. You can see how nice it is in the back here, how tight the face frame is to the cabinet doing this method. And you can see how tight it is up against the wall. Now, for scribes to be done well, you don't have to have it be this tight. For sure, it will be fine if there was a little space there, but it is nice to have that little extra clamping force by squeezing it in. And you can see the baseboard there. That was what I had to remove in order to get this piece in. But that's a nice tight joint. We are ready to take this to the shop and work on the crown moldings. Of course, I measured for all the crown molding, and we're all ready. Back at the shop, we are here. We've got the world famous jig in place. I can go ahead and start making these cuts. Now, you know that this jig is really helpful in making crown cuts, especially when you're cutting it with it nested vertically like this. I prefer to cut my molding like this. However, some prefer to lay it flat, and that's cool too. I just don't do that. If I need to cut bigger crown, I can always take it to the DeWalt and cut bigger crown, but this Capex actually cuts reasonably sized crown without any modification, so that's nice. So what I'm doing right now is I'm just making sure that my cut lines are good and everything is in the right spot. Want to make sure that it's clearing my saw and it looks like it's good so we can make the cut. Put your piece face down and hook the tape measure on the long point of one of the ends and make your mark. This is a long point to long point inside miter, so it's real easy to do. Once you have your mark established, transfer it to the front top of the molding and slide it down. And of course, you'll notice that I haven't changed the miter angle here. I need to change it so that it cuts to the other side. Why am I not changing it? I don't know. But maybe I'll figure it out at some point. Here we go. I did figure it out. And make your cut. And just repeat the process for all the other cuts and you'll be done in no time. This probably took a total of 5 minutes for me to cut all these parts, and mostly it was because this saw is a little less simple to make the cuts as the DeWalt, as it's a little bit tighter to cut big crown and see the cut line. So for cutting big crown, I still prefer the DeWalt, but the Capex is a phenomenal saw. There's no doubt about it. Back at the job site, we are ready to sand all the face frame parts nice and smooth. And I actually sand all the joints, even though I didn't glue them up. And, it's just a good idea before you do all the molding and everything, just to make sure that no joint has lifted up and there's complete smoothness all around. I'm using a 6-inch sander, but a 5-inch sander would work also. This is just a nice touch. Now to fine tune the joints where the miters are here, I'm going to go ahead and use some sandpaper and a nice sharp chisel to get in and just clean that up. Doesn't take much. Just blend those 45s very nicely and make sure that any wet spot that you had, maybe from your glue rag, make sure that didn't raise the grain a little bit, and if it did, just give it a little light sanding right in those areas. It's tough to get any other sander in there, so you got to do some hand sanding. I need to mark carefully where I need to remove the baseboard for my 3/4 inch baseboard. I'm going to be putting in about a 5-inch tall, 3/4 inch thick baseboard that is going to go right past the house baseboard. So I need to carefully take out my multi-tool and cut that out on both sides, the right and the left cabinet, as well as the front and back of the cabinet. So there's going to be 4 spots where I need to remove these. Okay, now I need to carefully lay out where the height is going to be. So I'm going to take out actually my 12-inch square, and then I'm going to transfer the line all the way to the other side so I can make sure the piece going back is square to the cabinet and level and not going down or uphill. Need to put on my molding. Now, of course, my GoPro shut off while I was filming the first part, but you get the idea. The crown molding goes in with some 16 gauge nails, and I use some spring clamps on the miters to hold them nice and tight. Oh, the crown molding went on nicely. As you can see, it's nice and tight to the ceiling, and the miters are nice and tight. Of course, I leave the miter clamps on for the glue to set completely before I take them off. No sense in taking them off early. Now there's going to be a light bar up in this big area up here. That's why it's a little bit wider than the middle part. And when I did this, I tried to make sure that all the joints were perfectly smooth, so I sanded everything again. But also I made sure that I cleaned off this area here, just in case there was any glue that ran down here. I was able to clean that out, as well as before I put the cabinet in, I measured for the stud location, and that is so that I would know where to measure from for the cabinet to secure it to the wall. So up until this point, this is not secured to the wall. It is just floating. And now it is time to secure it to the wall. Now I've got my belt sander out to fine tune the cut on this thing. I just need to take it down a little bit to make it fit. And sometimes it's easier to do that than take it out to the miter saw and cut it to length. I just need to take off about a 1/16 of an inch, the bottom part, as the wall is a little bit angled. Now I just use my finish nailer, 16 gauge, with a little glue and some spring clamps, and nail it in place. Using my square, I make sure that it's the right height that needs to be, and that's it. Pretty simple. Let's take a look and see what it looks like after it's been done. Nice and clean. I can go ahead and take these off. As it's nailed in place, the miters are perfectly tight, and I use quick set glue on that, so that's good. The next thing I do on this, rather than just leaving it like that, it's really important, even if you think they're flush, it's nice to go ahead and level out those top edges. Because when you ultimately put these things together, even if there's a subtle void, the paint will collect and you'll get a divot. So if you want these things to look nice, then this is just what you have to do. Yeah, miters can be really tight and perfect. It doesn't matter. You still need to do this. The paint doesn't adhere well to sharp corners either, so knocking off that sharp edge is definitely the smart thing to do. It'll prevent chip outs down the road as well. So that looks really good. One note also, before I put this baseboard in, back at the shop, I went ahead and sanded just like I did the face frame. So the face got sanded nicely and the edges jointed and sanded, eased them, and it's nice and tight. So as we go in, we look at the moldings, we can see just how clean this turned out and how tight it is up against the wall. This job is almost complete. We just have a little bit more to do. You can see this front edge. I think it just looks so much better without a scribe molding. Now maybe you can understand why I didn't want to put one on that front edge, but we will put one in here because this area actually, we could have done the same exact thing, but I elected not to. Mainly I wanted that front to be nice and clean without anything, but we'll go ahead and put the scribe on the inside. One final note too, I went ahead and sanded the back edge of the face frame. I knew that would be visible. So that's a completely smooth joint as well as the bottom. You know, when you're having a cabinet like this in a home, or you're ultimately going to want to feel these areas, right? As a customer, possibly somebody sitting there, it's nice to have them be nice and smooth. I also did the back as well as this part here to make sure there was no void right there. So that back of the face frame needs to be completely smooth where those cabinets in the face frame meet up, so that there's no void. Because you can see a void so easily. All you have to do is look down, and if you see a gap, that's no good. So we want to make sure that the face frames are nice and smooth and flush. Back at the shop, when I previously ripped all my material for my face frames, I was left with long strips, and I leave those purposefully so that I can use them to make scribes. It's much better to make your own scribes if you can. Sometimes it's not possible, but it's always nice if you can. This is store-bought scribe, and it's oak. I don't use this too frequently, so I have a bunch laying around. But I'm using it as a sizing example for you. I take a 1/4 inch radius roundover bit, and that seems to be the perfect size. And then I go ahead and mill up the parts. With my rip fence set to basically flush with the bearing, I go ahead and take a feather board and drop the feather board down so it's nice and tight. And I can go ahead and route my 1/4 inch radius round over. And I use as many pieces as I have, making 2 at a time. Then I come over to the table saw and set up for the rip cut. Now I use those scrap pieces of oak or any store-bought scribe to set up my width. But as you can see with these thin strips, I'm only going to get a few pieces out of them, but that's okay. That's what I want. I can definitely get a lot of yield out of these. I'm using a thin kerf rip blade, and that allows me to get even more yield. But you want to make sure that you're doing this properly. So after each pass, you want to joint the edge. And once you get to the point where you can't joint it anymore, that's pretty much when you're going to stop it. So after they get too thin, you're not going to use them anymore. Using a push stick with a pad on the back to capture the wood, I run these pieces, do 2 at a time, flipping the boards over each time. And now I can joint the edges again, each side, and run another pass on the on the router table, and then repeat the process until all the parts are done and or I've exhausted this material. So I end up making about, 8 pieces or so out of these thin strips that otherwise probably would have been trashed. And with all these parts cut and ready to go, I'm going to put some glue on the back of them, and I'm actually going to use my cordless pin nailer, my Makita. Of course, I would be using my Milwaukee as I've changed over to that, but the Makita worked well for this thin application, and it looks great. Here is the finished product. I had a little helper come in and put the shelves in for me so they're nice and evenly spaced. It's actually not too difficult of a job for a 12-year-old, and he enjoys it. Just be sure to glue your scribes down. It's going to be much better. The end result's going to be much better, and your caulk line is not going to break ever. So definitely glue. All right. Well, this looks great. And after I do this, I am going to show you what it looks like with the color painted on it, and you will see. Quite a transformation. Okay, now the walls are not painted, I understand. The lights are not on completely, but it is almost 100% completed. The cabinet's totally done, and there are a couple little touch-ups that will need to be dealt with, but primarily it's all good. they forgot to caulk that, which absolutely drives me crazy. So they're going to come back and do that, which means they're going to have to do that very carefully, um, as well as the other side too. But you can see the paint job is flawless, and the poplar paints up so beautifully. I just love it. So smooth. And to be honest, the fact that they didn't caulk these, it's not a huge deal, but it's something that I take seriously. The other thing I take really, really seriously is the sheen, and they totally messed up this. They did not apply enough primer in there and sand in between, so that's going to have to be shot again. All the shelves are going to have to be shot again, and that shouldn't be too difficult, but this is completely unacceptable. The problem is that if you install this stuff in the later evening, you don't see the light shining on this. And once the light shines on it, you can see it. So this is why I come back to look at jobs after they're painted. Everything needs to be looked at because I'm going to look at it with more of a discerning eye than most people. And this is my work. So we can't have this. After this is all done, the walls are going to be painted completely, and they're going to be painted dark. So there was no concern about getting paint on the ceiling or walls. But I just wanted to point out, look at this sheen. Look at how clean that is. And this is why I take so much time and effort to make my cabinets as nice and tight as possible, because this is where it counts, right? The finished product. And you definitely want things to be nice and tight. Now, unfortunately, the drywall work leaves a lot to be desired on that left side. It's really unfortunate, but I hope with the dark color and the flat paint, that will kind of go away. Now, of course, as you can see, there's sconces on the wall, and there's a nice big piece of art. They had this custom couch made, which looks really nice. And to treat this whole cabinet, they're actually going to put wallpaper behind each of the openings, as well as light bars up on the left and right side. So that's why those spaces are a little large. There's going to be nice lights up there. And that area up there is for the electrical to route through. But when they put the wallpaper back behind, they're going to go ahead and secure it along the whole length of the cabinet. So these adjustable shelves are really important, so they can remove the shelves, apply the paper, and then put the shelves back on. It's one of the reasons we went with adjustable. So as you can see, looking back at the whole thing here, this cabinet is, as you know, about 12.5 feet long by 9 feet tall. To secure the cabinet to the wall, I secured it right up here, right at the bottom, so you cannot see the screws. And of course, they covered them with putty, but you can't tell where they are, and they're at the very bottom, as well as above the top shelf right there in a very inconspicuous spot. This wraps up this cabinet job, and again, I want to thank you so much for watching. I certainly appreciate the feedback that I've been getting, so please let me know how you like this type of video, and comment and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I would really appreciate the feedback, and look forward to speaking with you guys. Thank you so much, and again, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.